everyone, and welcome to Seeds of Hope, Regenerative Agriculture with Elena Garitas. I'm your host, and this is episode number 12. On this podcast, join me on a journey across the regenerative agriculture ecosystem through conversations with farmers, founders, investors, and changemakers as we learn how to create healthier soils, communities, and food. Today, I am thrilled to welcome Mary Purdy, an integrative eco-dietitian who works at the fascinating intersection of human health and sustainable food systems. Mary spent over 13 years in clinical practice using a personalized food as medicine approach and taught for 8 years at Bastyr University in Seattle. Currently, Mary serves as the managing director of the Nutrient Density Alliance, an organization working to connect the dots between soil health and nutrient-rich food. She's also adjunct faculty at the Culinary Institute of America's Master's Program in Sustainable Food Systems. She has published a white paper, which I will link below, as well as 125 podcast episodes and 2 books. So with all this background, in this conversation today, we explore the alarming decrease in nutrient density in our modern food supply and how this connects to the rise in chronic diseases. We also go into the critical role of polyphenols and phytochemicals in our health. And don't worry, we explain what these are in simple terms and tie that back to how healthy soil microorganisms help plants produce these compounds. We also touch on practical strategies for improving your own nutrient intake and diversifying your diet in ways that support both personal and planetary health. I love when Mary shares what she calls her smoothie moment, that realization when she began questioning where her food actually came from and how it was produced. As she puts it so beautifully, we're only as healthy as the soil in which our food grows. So whether you're a health professional, a farmer, or simply someone who cares about the quality of your food, I think you'll find this conversation both enlightening and practical. So let's dive right into my conversation with Mary Purdy. Enjoy. Yeah, you're in Seattle,
I'm
right?
Near Seattle, Port Townsend, Washington, which is on the Olympic Peninsula.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. I haven't been up there yet.
Pacific Northwest is not to be missed.
I'll go in the summer. But yes, I'm so looking forward to diving into this conversation about food, about health, both human health, soul health, planetary health.
Yeah, me too.
So let's dive right
Okay.
in. Mary, I'm really excited to have you here. You have so much experience. And as someone who's spent over 13 years in clinical practice using food as medicine, and now you lead the Nutrient Density Alliance, I'm curious, what observations from your clinical work first led you to make that connection between soil health and human health? What was that aha moment,
Yeah.
if there was one?
Well, I would say there was a few, and it was a bit of a circuitous journey. Originally, as I was working with thousands of patients, I definitely saw the impact that nutrition was having on people's lives and transforming with preventing and reversing and addressing all kinds of chronic diseases. And I also had the sense that I understood that the foods that I was tending to recommend, more plant-based or humanely treated animals, grass-grazed, organic when possible, less packaging, I knew that that was also better for the environment. And I started having these, what I'm calling smoothie moments, where I'd be making my morning smoothie and going, wait a second, where did this banana come from? Who picked this kale? Were these berries organic? What was the process that made this whey protein that I'm throwing in there? And I started really understanding and thinking about, where did my food come from? And then as the climate crisis was getting worse, I started realizing, oh my gosh, our food system that I am a part of, our agricultural system that I am a part of, is actually responsible for a third of greenhouse gases and biodiversity loss and environmental degradation. And I also began to think, oh, wait a second, the food and agricultural system, if it's the problem, then it also can be the solution. And soil was this piece that came together for me as being like, wow, this is the solution. And it is so integral to nutrition, which was the piece that when I heard about environment and climate change and all the things that we could be doing in our food and agricultural system, nutrition was rarely mentioned. And I thought, gosh, this could be the turning point here. And soil was the piece that I began to believe if we fix the soil, which can then sequester carbon and make for a better atmosphere and help with climate change, we are also producing better food that is more nutritious. So I think that was the piece for me that really felt solid and also really felt like it needed a voice around the nutrition piece that was missing. And I wanted to help fill that void.
Smoothie moment. I am definitely copying that. I think it really illustrates how disconnected or uninformed we are in our day-to-day lives about where our food comes from,
Definitely.
who grew it, how it was grown, and then what impact it has on our bodies. And that is something that everybody cares about, our health. And so when you're thinking about from your experience and all these years you've studied the physiological effect of nutrition on our bodies, can you walk us through what actually happens in the body when someone consumes, like you said, packaged food, not organically grown, industrially grown food versus organic or nutrient dense food? And I'm sure there's so many processes, but is there anything specifically that you've observed over the years?
Absolutely. And I don't want to bore your listeners with like a whole bunch of physiology, but I'm going to stick to maybe like four main points here. And we're really talking about that ultra processed foods. And when I discuss that term, I'm not talking about like a bean soup that was processed from beans and vegetables and things that made into a can of soup. We really are talking about 60% of the calories that we take in are from these ultra processed foods that have very few vitamins and minerals, very few nutrients, and have an overwhelming amount of additives and chemicals and foods that we know or ingredients we know are poor for our health. So
And Mary, did you say 16 or 60%?
Basically
Wow.
two-thirds of our food come from those ultra processed, or our calories, I should say, come from ultra processed foods, typically in the standard American diet. And that diet is being exported as well. So this is becoming more of a global issue as it relates to dietary patterns. But as to your original question, there's so much that occurs, and it's funny because it's like people are finally realizing, oh, nutrition actually has an impact on health. We've been talking about this for decades and decades, and I think people are finally getting it. There's four areas that I would say that a high intake of these ultra processed foods and a lack of nutrient rich foods are having on the body. Number one, every single biochemical reaction that is happening in your body right now relies on nutrients. So the synthesis of neurotransmitters rather, in your brain looks to zinc and iron and magnesium. The production of your liver enzymes that are helping to neutralize carcinogenic materials that come into your body just by living, that requires certain nutrients. The production of all of the immune factors that your immune system uses to fight off disease and keep you healthy, that requires nutrition. So when we don't get an adequate amount of those nutrients when we're eating this many processed foods, or even the foods now that we know are not as nutrient rich, that has an impact on just basic physiological function. And we're not getting those vitamins and minerals that our body needs to function, and therefore we tend to not feel full. So there's a lot of what we call hidden hunger, where people feel like they've eaten a lot of food, but they're still not totally satiated. That's number one. Number two, I would say, is around inflammation, right? Which is a hallmark of numerous chronic diseases that we know are really having an impact on folks. And there are many triggers in the ultra processed food content that actually bring on inflammatory processes or inflammatory responses in our body, which we know when that gets out of control can be very problematic. And our body is using the outer layer of every cell to actually initiate an inflammatory or anti-inflammatory response. And that outer layer of our cells is actually dictated, the content of that outer layer is dictated by what we consume.
Wow.
Yeah, and that includes those phytochemicals, right? And those phytochemicals are these beneficial plant compounds that come from plants. And ultra-processed foods tend to be very, very devoid of those phytochemicals that can have a big impact on the inflammatory or anti-inflammatory response. The third piece physiologically is our metabolic response. And when I think of that, I'm thinking of like, levels of cholesterol going up and blood sugar going up and insulin resistance that happens as a response to the intake or input of high amounts of sugar, high amounts of processed fats, high amounts of poor quality protein. All of those respond to the lack of nutrition and to the excess of those nutrients that are not beneficial to us. And then the last piece is the gut microbiome, right? So the gut microbiome, all of those microorganisms in our gut, which have a huge impact on many systems in the body, they are not being fed properly when we have ultra-processed foods. And in fact, we are feeding the bad bacteria in our guts and not giving our good bacteria a chance to be fed well. So that has a huge impact on many process in our human body. So those are 4 areas that I think are really key to think about.
Yeah, thank you for breaking that down. And we'll circle back to the gut microbiome because, as we talked about previously, in our previous conversation, there's an interesting connection there to the soil microbiome as well. So, outlining all these effects that ultra-processed and nutrient-poor food has on our bodies, we've seen a very well-documented rise in chronic disease, especially in the US, but a lot of the world globally. And I'm wondering, are you also aware, on the flip side of that, on research that talks about the degradation of nutrient density in our food? So comparing foods from decades ago to foods now.
Big
Is there
difference.
something like that you've come across?
There's a lot. And in fact, there's USDA data. That's the United States Department of Agriculture. They have actually measured the content of certain vitamins and minerals in foods and have found it to be much lower today than it was in 1950. That we're seeing that across the board in pretty much all foods. Sometimes it's about the macronutrients, that's the protein, carbohydrate, and fat, but really it's the micronutrients, all of those vitamins and minerals that we're seeing an alarming decline. There's a great paper. If you Google alarming decline food supply, you will find it. It's quite disturbing to think that the thing that we need to survive and to thrive in our lives, which is food, is not giving us what our bodies actually need. And in fact, we have to consume more food in order to reach the just basic requirements that our body needs to function at just a baseline level.
I'll link that in the show notes. And that really reminds me. So, my mom is a nutritional scientist. So, growing up, we always learned about the connection of why we would eat different foods together and how the different chemical compounds interact and support our bodies. And she grew up on a farm and always had this philosophy of having a diverse diet will support you. And being critical also of a lot of supplements, which the supplement industry has exploded in the recent years. But now, actually, it's, as we've just talked about, it's much more difficult to get all of the nutrients that you need from our food. And I think I shared with you this study that I came across at Acres USA from the Bionutrient Institute that really showed how many conventionally grown fruits and vegetables do you need to get the same amount of nutrition from it said optimally grown fruit or vegetable. And the numbers were crazy. Like, I remember, for example, you have to eat 15 grapes conventionally grown to 1 grape optimally grown, or I believe it was 3 tomatoes versus 1 tomato, which is a lot of tomatoes.
It is.
And
Go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
No, I think it's going to depend also on which kind of tomato we're talking about and where that conventional tomato was grown, because things can be grown conventionally in good quality soil, or they can be grown conventionally in poor quality soil. It really is about the quality of that soil and what is being used to grow that fruit or vegetable or crop. So yes, there is definitely a need to eat more of the same food in order to get the amount that was originally named or originally thought of as being the amount in a tomato from 1950 when they first were starting to actually measure. So yeah, and I think it really is dictated by the health of that soil in which the food is grown. That is dictating the level of nutrition in the food, which is being dictated by the number of agrochemicals or the processes by which that food is being grown.
And if I'm remembering correctly from my research, at the Nutrient Density Alliance, are you also involved with conducting research that explores that connection between optimally grown vegetables versus vegetables that were grown in poor soil conditions?
So we have our fingers in a number of different pots around this. Number one, we have looked in depth at the research around what is being done out there in terms of nutrient density testing, and also looking in general at the science behind soil and how soil helps to dictate what kinds of nutrients go into that plant. With the Nutrient Density Alliance, we are bringing together numerous stakeholders in this area of connecting regenerative and organic practices with nutrient density. We are encouraging our members to do that nutrient density testing. We are trying to aggregate the data of the member testing that's being done, as well as other brands, businesses, farms that are doing that same kind of testing, and helping people to understand how much data is actually out there. Number two, we are engaged in a project working with Edacious, which is a nutrient density testing lab, where we're looking at certain brands of animal protein and certain raw products from animal protein that come from farms, and testing those samples from our members with a conventional version of that sample. So looking at, like, for instance, a ribeye from one of our farms versus a ribeye from a conventional grocery store grown in an industrial type of environment, and looking at the nutrient differences. And that's going to be looking not just at, again, protein, fat, and carbohydrate, but looking at some of those phytochemicals, because what that animal eats also dictates what is in its meat, not just the carbs, the fat, and the protein that comes in an animal's meat. We're also looking at these phytochemicals or phytosterols, which are plant sterols that may be a component of the animal's meat as well.
Yes. And I have two questions that are coming up for me right now. But first, I want to dig a little bit deeper into those phytochemicals. Previously, we've talked and you mentioned polyphenols specifically and their importance. And I just would love for you to explain, what are they and what do they do in our bodies?
Okay, so I want to take a deep breath, because I feel like this is where people might go, oh my gosh, let me start looking at my watch, because it can get kind of complicated. But I want to give this overarching umbrella of phytochemicals, which means basically plant chemicals. So when we say chemicals, we're not talking about Clorox, we're not talking about Ajax, we're talking about chemicals that the plant actually synthesizes in response to the environment, to a pest or a creature, to some kind of predator. It squirts out these special phytochemicals, and that helps to protect it. It's part of its immune or defense system. So that's the umbrella, our phytochemicals. Under those phytochemicals are a bunch of different families, and we have our polyphenols as being one of those families, and carotenoids as being one of those families, and organochloride, or I can't remember the exact name, being a family. And then polyphenols is probably the most studied family of these phytochemicals. You probably have heard of things like flavonoids or flavanols, or flavones, like isoflavones. And these are these compounds, again, that the plant has synthesized that has protective benefits to us. Very often people will go like, oh, it's antioxidants. Great, I understand that. It is so much greater than antioxidants. That is one component of what these polyphenols can do. And that's essentially kind of neutralizing free radicals, which are these very reactive molecules that run around in our bodies and cause damage to our organs and our cells. So it does help to act as that antioxidant, neutralizing the effects of that. But it is so much more. So these polyphenols, and these are things like maybe you've heard of quercetin or resveratrol or anthocyanidins. They have
I must say, I
Oh,
have
you
not
haven't?
heard of
That's
those.
okay. This is where
No.
I need to like check myself, and not everyone knows what quercetin is. That's found in onions and apples and buckwheat, and anthocyanidins are found in blueberries and blackberries and beets. It,
Are those considered generally helpful to human
very
bodies?
helpful. Yes.
Okay.
And because they have these antioxidant roles, they are anti-inflammatory, they are antimicrobial, antiviral, they protect the brain, they protect the liver. They affect, remember I was talking about all those pathways that happen in the body, that physiological pathways that are driven by nutrients. So there are all of these pathways in the body, these processes that are helping your cells to function, or helping your liver again to recover, or helping your brain to work really well. Those pathways are affected and driven by those polyphenols. So when we don't get those polyphenols in, those pathways, again, that are helping to make your body as amazing as possible, and protecting your heart and your liver and your brain, those pathways don't operate as well. So we are seeing a deficiency in those pathways working at their best.
Hmm. So it sounds like polyphenols really impact a lot of the core systems in our body, including our immune
Yes.
system, our nervous
Our gut
system, our
microbiome.
uh, our gut microbiome.
Mhm.
Exactly. And just to get down to my level of nutrition for dummies. So, how do polyphenols compare to vitamins or minerals, or are they part of these groups? How can I think about those two concepts that I'm already slightly familiar with?
That is a wonderful question. And I think that is where there seems to be a knowledge deficit in general. And they have been less studied overall. And it's hard to know how much you need of polyphenols, whereas vitamins and minerals like zinc and vitamin C, we have studied those extensively and have for many, many years. And like vitamin C helps with your immune system because it helps with your natural killer cells. Polyphenols are in much, much smaller amounts. Like when you look at the back of a nutrition label and you go like vitamin C, okay, this gives me 10% of my vitamin C. That's because there has been a certain allotted amount of vitamin C that we need to survive, right? So if you don't get enough vitamin C, maybe your dad used to say this to you, like you said to me, you're going to get scurvy. Or if you don't get enough vitamin D, like my dad used to say to me, you're going to get rickets. We know that there are these diseases specific to deficiencies in these vitamins and minerals. It is less clear about deficiencies of polyphenols or these phytochemicals that may drive a certain disease state. And rather, what we understand is it's the compilation, it's that diversity, right? That variety of different foods that provide us with a whole spectrum of these polyphenols that ultimately have these really beneficial effects on our immune system and our neurological system and our human gut microbiome. But we don't necessarily know the exact amount, right? I wrote a paper
Mm.
recently that looked at the effects of the amount of anthocyanins in blueberries, or a certain compound in blueberries, and that we needed, I can't remember the exact amount, I can get it for you, 100 milligrams of this compound actually was associated with like a lower risk for breast cancer. And they actually had a specific amount and looked at these polyphenols as being an intervention for certain kinds of cancers, making sure that you get a sufficient amount, or enough to make a difference in your body's response to all of the onslaughts of issues that it faces on a regular basis.
So, when we think about having the science to back up all that we've talked about and having the data to back up food as health, food as medicine, have you worked with any patients where you really saw either transformation, or is there a story that you want to share that illustrates some of the concepts we've talked about?
Absolutely. And I've worked with so many patients with whom I've seen such incredible transformation. It's really been amazing to witness. But there's one person that I remember because we actually were doing a lot of testing. I worked for a company for about 4 years where we were testing gut microbiome and testing all kinds of genetics and testing all kinds of cortisol and testing their functional labs. And she came in and she had a lot of constipation, a lot of digestive issues. She had high cholesterol. She was struggling with metabolically unhealthy weight. And we started taking labs on her, and all of those things, she had elevated inflammation, her gut microbiome, which we looked at, we had her poop into a little jar. We could see that the families of organisms or microbes or microorganisms in her gut were coming from a family that has been correlated with digestive issues, and constipation. So when we changed her diet and we got her eating some more plant-based foods and some more vegetables and changing some of the things that she was doing on a regular basis, always, the lifestyle changes as well, we actually saw her cholesterol go down in several months. Her inflammatory marker called CRP went down. Her weight came off. Her digestion improved. And when we went back and looked at her gut microbiome, that family that had been correlated with the high amounts of digestive issues had been significantly diminished in number. So seeing that data and understanding that all that she had really done were to make some of these dietary changes was really remarkable in terms of understanding the profound impact that that food can have on your body and your health.
Wow, so it sounds like her lived experience shifted so drastically, and she didn't take any other medication, did she, during the
Nothing,
process?
there was nothing. She was there to do an experiment and to see, what the data showed. And the data really bore out like that what she was doing was working for her. And she felt, her symptoms completely changed. She felt better in her body. She saw her weight reduce. She saw her digestive tract work better. She stopped having constipation. I mean, it was really remarkable. And she kind of couldn't believe it herself.
Yes, thank you for sharing that story. I think she couldn't believe it herself speaks volumes because we sometimes need to be shown what's
Mm.
possible in order to really be able to make that change. And I think this is a good illustration of how the gut microbiome is influenced by what we eat, which is influenced by the soil.
One connection here that I think is really important is the connection between soil and those polyphenols. So why am I talking about soil and why am I talking about polyphenols? And they're like two separate things. There's a huge connection. The reason why soil is so important as it relates to that nutrient density of food is because when soil is healthy, and we can use a number of different indicators for that, a couple of which are you have, good soil organic matter. That's the amount of dead stuff that's in the soil. The soil has good structure, so it holds water. That's a good indicator. But a really strong indicator of healthy soil is the diversity of microorganisms in that soil. And why is that so important? Because the microorganisms and the plant growing in that soil have this wonderful relationship. The plants can only reach its roots so far, or her roots so far into the soil. So the microorganisms are like, hey, we got you covered. We will grab some of those nutrients and help bring those to your roots so that you can uptake them more readily. The other thing the microorganisms do is they actually work in concert with the plant to create those polyphenols, to create those phytochemicals. They play a role in the production of that. They're actually helping and working in concert with that plant and helping her to synthesize those compounds. But in the face of really poor quality soil where there aren't a lot of microorganisms, or where there's lots of agrochemicals that are being used that actually diminish the microbial population of the soil, those processes, that nutrient delivery and the synthesis of those bioactive compounds, I'm using a new word here, those are the polyphenols, it tends to be less. And that's why we're talking about the connection between soil health and nutrient density through the lens of these polyphenols and their production.
Right. So when we talk about what are the agricultural practices that increase that diversity and amount of microorganisms in the
Mhm.
soil, such as not killing off that life with different chemical additives.
Exactly.
And then we talk about how those microorganisms work together with the plant, increase the nutrient density of the plant, which is then eaten by humans or fed to livestock,
Mhm.
which increases the bionutrients in livestock, and then the T-bone steak that we eat or whatever
Or
it
the
is,
eggs or whatever, yeah.
or the eggs. Exactly. So that's where that connection. Thank you for illuminating that connection because I think that's really critical. And so, with all of this knowledge about the effects on our body, nutrient density of food, and soil health, the work that you do now at the Nutrient Density Alliance really works on creating a bridge between, as I understand it, nutritionists, healthcare providers, farmers, and creating that systems change. So I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about how you bring together all this knowledge that you just share with us up to this
Mm.
point and build that into solutions for getting more healthy foods to people.
Yes, thank you. And the Nutrient Density Alliance started back in, I think, 2022 and was led originally by Tina Owens, who created an amazing foundation. And it really started off with a focus on brands, on CPG or consumer packaged goods. And we were working with brands who had some kind of initiative or were interested in some kind of initiative around regenerative agriculture. They were using products, or rather ingredients in their products that were being grown using regenerative agriculture. And we were trying to help them understand that consumers are very interested in their health. Consumers, when they go to the grocery store, they look at things and they're like, not everybody, but when you have a values-based consumer, they are coming to the store going, what's going to make me healthier? I want to spend money on something that's going to make me, take away my pain points or make me a healthier, longer living person. So we said,
And what tastes good
yes.
as
Oh my
well.
gosh. And that is an integral part. I want to get back to that for sure, Lena, because I think that's a really important part of this conversation. But we thought, God, brands and businesses like that can be helpful in terms of driving regenerative agriculture demand through letting their consumers know that the food that is being grown in this way and made into these products or these foods is actually healthier, is more nutrient rich. And we started having the research to back that up and to bear that out. We created a white paper, or a white paper was written about a year ago in early 2024, that really helped brands to understand the case for this and the argument for this. And we started suggesting start getting nutrient density testing done because that's what consumers want to see. If you can say that on your package or in your communications, wonderful. The thing is that when I came in about a year ago as the managing director, what I brought with me was this connection to the nutrition and food as medicine and healthcare space, because these are people who are interfacing with communities at large in much bigger spaces, whether they are food service directors, retail dietitians, people working at hospitals, people working in low income communities, or working with food banks, or massive institutions that schools,
Schools.
exactly, academic institutions that are universities, stadiums, all these organizations that are reaching thousands and millions of people, many of whom are often lower income or underserved. I thought, gosh, we need to bring in more of those voices to really make the case and be champions for food grown in this way, especially people who are interfacing with communities that are struggling with the very chronic diseases that we have been trying to prevent. And they're very often driven by those ultra-processed foods, by a lack of nutrition in the diet, by lowered nutrient density, which we know is so integral to health, by foods that don't support the human gut microbiome, which we know has so many influential impacts on the system. And then bringing in farmers too, because farmers are ultimately where it all begins, right? So we know that farmers need to understand that there is a case, that there is a demand for their growing food in a way that is in concert with nature. And if we know that Sodexo or Aramark or Cisco, which are producing tons and tons of meals, if we can get organizations like that on board, or food as medicine initiatives, which are serving food banks and so many other communities, if we can get folks to say, hey, let's not just serve any old food to get calories in bellies, which is very important. I admit that 100%. But perhaps we can get calories in bellies, some of which have been grown using these more regenerative, organic, conservation, agroecological techniques, however you want to, climate smart, however you want to perceive those.
Are you already working with these big distributors like Cisco, Sodexo?
Not yet. We're not working with them yet, but we are having lots of great conversations with people in this space, and people are attending our meetings, and we're starting to share information, share resources. We do have dietitians and nutritionists and healthcare providers in our membership who are working with organizations that can have an impact here. And we are trying to build that tier, that membership tier, get more folks who have that kind of broader impact and connect them with our current members, many of whom, as I mentioned, are farmers, are folks in the CPG or business brand world, the food industry, to say, hey, if this dietitian, let's say, for instance, is running this food service, they're a food service manager at this organization, they can be requesting to get your food on their shelves or to get your farmed whatever it might be, or a ranched animal into their meal plan. So the goal for us is to start making those connections, bringing people together, and really making the argument for why this is such a key solution to our climate crisis, our environmental crisis, and our health crisis.
Really important work bringing stakeholders together
Yeah.
and getting them on the same page. What have you been hearing from those meetings, from those different stakeholders? What are some of the arguments or things that are clicking with people versus what are some obstacles or challenges, especially when you're thinking about those big players that have a lot of reach on millions of meals?
Yeah, I actually just had a great conversation yesterday with an organization that brings food to food banks. And they are working on trying to bring more regeneratively grown or organically grown food into food banks. And I think what I hear over and over again is they know that they're doing the right thing. They know that they're supporting farmers. They know that they're serving underserved communities with better quality food. However, how to communicate that is not always easy. So I think the communication piece is where people are scratching their heads or have a few question marks. How do we make this understandable to somebody who just needs to make sure that they have enough food to feed their children? Or how do we make this make sense to somebody who's not really interested in talking about soil health, but just wants healthier food? So I think we're looking for that soundbite. And we've been working with a really amazing organization called Smoketown, which is a fantastic marketing company that really works hard on working with like conscious brands and brands that care, sort of one of their mottos, and trying to understand how do we start helping people create these communication strategies that work, that are easy to understand, and that are super effective. We will be making that a very strong emphasis in 2025, and I'm very excited about that. The other thing that I wanted to mention too is wherever I go these days, I would say whether I'm at a conference or in a conversation, the phrase nutrient density always comes up. People are starting to understand it. They are starting to go, wait a second, this is important. This is the unlock for making the case for growing foods in this way. Fewer chemicals, which we know are harmful to farmers and the communities that live nearby farms, and especially for people who are immunocompromised or kids who have smaller bodies or elderly who are compromised. And these foods are more nutritious. So I think people are starting to really go, we need to have this be placed front and center of this conversation, that when we grow food in concert with nature, it actually delivers food that is more nutritious. And that is so necessary right now as we see people just riddled with chronic diseases that are absolutely preventable.
Mm-hmm. So I'm hearing that communicating that message and really getting the wording or the communication right to the end consumer is what is one of the key drivers of unlocking that demand. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, and I will just add to that, for myself, I've been studying soil science and nutrient density connection for 6 years. I've read hundreds and hundreds of papers, right? So it took me a number of years to really understand and be able to speak to this connection. We need to find a way to titrate that down into one paper and maybe a paragraph and maybe a sentence so that we can communicate that rapidly and quickly without having to take 6 years to make somebody really understand it.
Do you have already a draft of this one sentence or one paragraph that you could share, or is this still in
Very
development?
much in development, but at the Nutrient Density Alliance, we have created some toolkits that will be rolling out in the very, very near future. These are for our members. They are toolkits with talking points that are backed by science that will be able to be things from which they can draw to bring to presentations, to deliver to their customers, to put on their websites. Obviously, it will be open sources to everybody once people have that information, but that is definitely something we're working on. And stay tuned because we'll have a lot of that available on our site. And we have a wonderful research repository as well on our website that will be launched in the next week or two. So it might be launched by now, by the time this airs. And that will be another place where people can go for really rigorous scientific and seminal reports, seminal case studies, as well as some layperson articles that maybe are in simpler language, but still pack a punch in terms of what the science actually says.
Yes, thank you for sharing that out, and I'll definitely link that as well in the show notes. I have explored your website already. Just scratched the surface, but there is so much to learn on there. I do want to just go back to something we were talking about, thinking about the system. What do you think it takes to have schools serve local regeneratively farmed food or have hospitals serve this food as part of the strategy? So communication seems to be a huge part of that,
Mhm.
bringing the right stakeholders together. Do you have any thoughts around what the journey ahead of us is in implementing those changes?
Yeah, I think it's been a little bit unpredictable with all that's been going on with funding, because a lot of funding programs that were actually geared on bringing local foods to schools has been rescinded. That may
Mm.
change. That may have already changed. Things are a little bit, as I said, unpredictable in this culture and this environment right now. But I think funding is a big piece of this. There is a local food procurement program that has been in play that has been wonderful for helping hospitals and schools bring locally grown food from local farmers to their schools. So that's a big piece of it. There's a school that actually presented at a recent expo that I was at. That's in California has a goal of 100% organic to serve to their students. And I think they have gotten great buy-in because parents happen to be very, very concerned about the potential impact that poor quality food and poor quality nutrition is having on their kids, right? Kids have smaller bodies, they're more sensitive. We're seeing a lot of issues coming up in kids that did not come up 20, 50 years ago. And I think parents are very sensitive to that and they're noticing it. And they're also noticing the difference in kids when those kids are being less exposed to foods that are harmful and eating these foods that are from more nutritious sources. And in fact, this woman who was a food service director at this school in California, she's on the panel, she said the kids are actually showcasing how much they love it because it tastes better. And they're enjoying
Mm.
understanding where this food came from. It tastes better than the food they were getting before. And that for them is a driving factor. And you were mentioning taste. And yes, very often taste is what drives people to choose a certain food. And taste and flavor is very often driven by the production practices used. I was talking about those polyphenols and the flavanols and flavonoids and flavones. Those are a huge component of what makes a food smell or taste good. And that is, again, because of those production practices. So the proof is in the pudding. When the kids love it, I think that's a real indicator that there will be a greater demand for it. But funding, I think, is a big piece of this, and that's a problem right now.
Where have you seen funding come from in the past years? Has it been mostly through federal grants from the USDA, for example, or has there also been private investing?
There's definitely both. I mean, there's an entire organization that's called FORA, which is Funding for Organic and Regenerative Agriculture, and they are often they're a collection of folks who are looking to fund and support regeneratively and organically grown food. So it's funders like that, private funders like that, and then a lot of it is federal funding. I know the Rockefeller Foundation has been very instrumental in food as medicine programs and are very interested in regenerative agriculture, and they are also extremely interested in that connection between foods grown using more regenerative agriculture and the nutritional quality and food quality that arises as a result. But we need more. And
Hmm.
the other thing too that I think is happening, Elena, is grassroots movements. And I truly believe we've gotten so far away, we've gotten so corporatized in our food system, we've gotten away from this idea that people can, should, and must be growing their own food. People need to have agency over their food system, food sovereignty. Because when we have food sovereignty, when we can grow our own food, we, the people, right, can dictate what is in our food, what we are growing, how we are growing. And community gardens and urban farms are living that out. And I think that is one of the things that absolutely gives me hope when I think about the future are those kinds of initiatives that are happening everywhere and sometimes on a very small scale, sometimes in someone's parking lot of a, back of a school or some kind of spiritual area or like a church or a synagogue. But I feel like that is a space that is growing and continues to be very, very robust.
I love that you brought that up. And I have also this theory that grassroots
Oh,
change and movements are much harder to undo by changes in policy, changes in even our economic environment, because they are these strong personal connections that we have in community. And just to share something that I was inspired by today, as I told you, I just moved out here to California from Miami. So I'm rebuilding my community and I'm thinking about, okay, I
oh.
have to start over with sourcing the food that I want to consume from farmers I want to support. And looking for farmers markets and looking for community and thinking, okay, what if I combine the two and I host a dinner every 2 weeks, let's say,
Mm.
with regeneratively sourced food where we talk about the food, we taste it, and we hang out. And I'm sharing this because I'm excited about this idea, but also because I'm hoping that maybe that will start the conversation with people I meet, and they might continue that conversations with others. And so maybe this will inspire other people to have fun with sourcing
Yes.
local food, getting involved with grassroots movements that are happening locally, which can actually have a big impact and at scale.
I think you're
So
onto
I'm glad you
something.
brought that up.
Yeah, and you're talking about something really beautiful, which is the conversations that we have around food, the experience that we get to have when we eat with others, when we have community, when we share, when there's mutual aid, as it relates to the foods that we grow or are able to buy for each other and give one another or prepare for one another. We're missing that. We've become so isolated. So many of us, open up a package of something and eat in front of the TV without any thought about that food and where it came from. And for many people, I understand like people are busy, people are disconnected, and people have very little time and access to really healthy food a lot of the times. I think that is a huge, huge issue. And when we get a chance to share food together, to taste the difference and to talk about it, talk about where it came from, boy, that is such an honor to be able to have that and share that with others.
Absolutely. I mean, even thinking about traveling, when we travel to different places around the world, one big thing people get excited about is the food.
Yes.
Food is so culturally important, just like you said,
Mhm.
getting together is, um, an ancient ritual for us as a species.
It is. I agree 100%.
So I did have one other question about the funding, although this seems like a pretty radical shift. But I just wanted to tie this back before we move into the last questions here of our conversation. So you mentioned that we need more funding, and I'm curious, do you have a specific or an opinion about which areas we need to fund? in this transition?
Wow. I wish I had some more time to think about this. I would say that I'm going to say a few things. Number one, I think we need to fund those who have been underfunded for many, many years, and that is BIPOC farmers, right? So Black, Indigenous, people of color who are farming very often in concert with nature, using the practices that they've been using for millennia to make sure that they are not destroying the land and creating really healthy food. So I think funding for that sector of people just growing food in a way that is healthy and helpful to the environment, that's a big area. Number two, I would say, um, I think education is a big one. And we are actually designing a program right now that we call our Roots to Wellness program, where we're trying to help educate people who are in the food is medicine space, in the dietetics and nutrition space. And so that they can go out into their various sectors, wherever they're working, again, like in policy, academia, food banks, institutions, and they can speak to this so that they can change their procurement practices, change what's on the menu, change how they advocate. I think that's a big area of funding too. So being able to educate more people with these kinds of training programs. And then I'd say number three is it'd be great to just get more data, right? Everyone wants data. More research is needed is like on the bottom of every paper that you read. Do I agree that more research is needed all the time? Not necessarily. I think we have tons of research to show that when soil is healthier, when we have those soil health indicators, food just tends to be healthier. And that is just soil science, right? But if we can get more data, if we can get funding for every farm, for every producer of food or product creator to actually get funding so that they can do some nutrient density testing and we can have large scale testing in a variety of different places, then we can aggregate that data and say, look, there's really no question here. We have enough data at this point to say this is science and this is what happens in general, or this is what tends to happen. I think that would reduce the sort of the fear that people have, like maybe I'm not saying something that's true, when most of the time you are. And it's indisputable at this point that healthier soil produces healthier plants, which ultimately produce healthier people.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I definitely put you on the spot here a little bit. But I'm really glad that you also tied in our relationship as a food system to a lot of underrepresented farmers and food system stakeholders like BIPOC and Indigenous communities. I think that there is a larger conversation to be had there about not just everything that we've talked about, but also the more broader socio-political context of our food system and the different voices there, which we don't have time for in this episode, but I am planning to dive into it more in future episodes. And then, yes, also mentioning the reach education can have and the power that science and data has. So thank you for that perspective. As we start getting to the end of our conversation, I want to wrap it back to, okay, every single person might not care about the environment and might not care or know much about farming, but everyone cares about their health. So for listeners who want to improve their nutrient intake strategy and want to improve the food that they take in every day, do you have any recommendations on how to get started on this?
Yes.
Because after listening to all this, it can feel a little bit overwhelming.
I hear that 100%. And I would say it's always important to begin where you are at, right? No one has to do a complete 180 or start changing everything about their diet. That never works. Again, worked with thousands of patients. I know that doesn't work. The best thing to do is just to begin to think about, number one, what are you eating now? And where can you begin to add something in? You don't have to take a million things out. Like people are like, oh my God, my coffee, my bacon, my chocolate, my steak. Like, don't think of it that way. Think about how do we add things in? And number one, just diversify the diet. If you're only eating almonds, try a Brazil nut, right? If you're only eating broccoli, try tatsoi or collard greens. If you're only eating apples, bring in a different kind of fruit that maybe you haven't tried before. So diversifying the diet is number one. Number two is eating more plant-rich foods in general. So again, I'm not going to say reducing animal meat, but rather increasing those plant protein sources like your beans, your nuts, your legumes, your lentils, all these luscious and microbiome friendly foods that are rich with polyphenols. Yes, beans have polyphenols in them. They also have fiber and protein and are rich with vitamins and minerals. So getting more of those in the diet is really key if we're getting more nutrient dense foods in there. And then number 3 is when and if possible, seek out those foods that have been grown using those more regenerative practices or agroecological practices, or maybe you go to a market and it just says pesticide free, like that can be a start. Or if you are somebody who's like, I need to have meat in my diet, seek out the meat that's been humanely raised or grass grazed. Yes, there's research to show that grass grazed animals or pasture raised animals have higher levels of certain nutrients in their meat. So that is a perhaps more expensive product, but if you eat less of it, then you can potentially afford to bring that in. And then lastly, I would say something that I think is really underutilized in our food system are herbs and spices. People think, they don't have any benefit. They have tons of benefit. And if you're struggling with changing your diet, but you love basil, or you love smoked paprika, or you love za'atar, right? Bring those in so that tofu tastes amazing, or that bean dish, has an amazing pesto sauce on top of it. Those are really also rich in those polyphenols. So I think that can be a great way to add fun flavor and also shift your palate away from some of the foods that we sometimes gravitate towards, that we've been kind of tricked into thinking are the delicious foods, that are the highly processed fast foods that often give us a hit of something, but don't really bear out in terms of the nutritional benefits.
Do you have any recipe sites that you like online? Or I must admit, I have been using ChatGPT a lot for my
Oh,
recipes,
nice.
especially when there's an ingredient I've never used
Uh-huh.
before, and I just am in a space where I'm like, what do I do with this? But I think oftentimes people cook similar
Yeah.
things from day to day because that's what you know how to make. Do you have any resources that people can turn to make that easier?
That's a great question. I would say I often do the same thing as you, is I not with ChatGPT, but I just go to Google and I say chickpeas, coconut, yams, broccoli, and it'll always come up with something. So I often look at what do I have in the refrigerator. But I'm a big fan of cookbooks. I like actually opening a book and looking through something and reading little things so I can get offline. And I have a few cookbooks that I absolutely love. Nourishing Meals is one of them. And they have another cookbook called the Whole Life Cookbook. I think that's fabulous. There's a plant-based or a bean cookbook that I love to use as well that has all kinds of fabulous bean stews and salads and from all different cultures of using, many different cultures have beans as a mainstay. So I'd be happy to share some of those with you because I think it's fun to actually look through a cookbook. I started reading them as almost like a piece of fiction. I'd be pouring through it like, ooh, look at this. Look at the story of the avocado and the cilantro in the salad. Okay. So I think that can be a fun way to get to know your food a little bit.
I agree. I love cookbooks too. And I'll link all those in the show notes. So as we wrap up, do you have any final message that you'd like to leave our audience with, or anything else that you want to share?
I have two messages. Number one, I will say there cannot be any kind of food system transformation to a more healthy and regenerative food system without equity, food justice, inclusion, and diversity placed front and center. If we do not talk about those things, if we do not make sure that those voices are at the table, there can be no true transformation. And number two, I believe that we are only as healthy as the soil in which our food grows. So I hope all of you out there will be soil stewards and do what you are able to make sure the food that you are consuming is as healthy as the soil in which it grew.
I could not agree more. Thank you, Mary, so much for sharing your deep experience and knowledge and wisdom and advice for all of our listeners. This conversation has been such a pleasure, and I'll see you soon in Chicago.
Yes.
So I'm looking forward to
I
that.
can't wait. And thank you for giving me the space to have this conversation today. It's really an honor to be able to chat with people like you who care about this world. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Seeds of Hope. Our wonderful theme music is composed by Dane Myers. If you enjoyed the show, please follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube so you never miss an episode. Share it with a friend who might find it inspiring. And if you're loving the podcast, we'd be grateful if you could leave a rating and review on Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts. It really helps others discover us. See you next time, and thanks again.